Hi guys, welcome to Antique Sprinklers. Today we're going to be talking about a couple of L.R. Nelson products, but I'm going to use the vehicle of an origin story to do that. So I'm going to take you back to 1986 when I was a sophomore at Iowa State University, and I had an older brother who'd left Iowa maybe 4 years prior to that, and was working for a large irrigation installer, and I guess Ernie also had a small distributorship as well. But he was working for him in the Washington, D.C. metro area. A lot of people call that the DMV, and living in College Park, Maryland. And so, the summer jobs were not great for college kids in Iowa back in the 1980s. For all I know, they're still not super. And I could make about twice as much money if I came out here, and I wouldn't have to worry about food or board because I'd be staying with my brother. And so, so in the middle of May of '86, my next door neighbor in the dorms in Ames at Iowa State and I towed his motorcycle behind an '86 Oldsmobile all the way from Iowa to College Park, Maryland, and that was quite an adventure. Now, I will admit that I did make probably twice as much as I would have made in Iowa that summer, but we drank it all up. Georgetown was a fun place to go if you were 20 years old, 19 and 20. That's what I was that summer. And we spent a lot of time there and in the bars on the campus of the University of Maryland in College Park, if you're familiar with those places along Route 1. And so that's where the money went. But it was quite an adventure, you know. I was sleeping on a couch that had wooden arms on it, and I was so exhausted at the end of every day that I would fall asleep with just my head leaning against one of these wooden arms, and I'd wake up when my brother came downstairs and told me it was time to go to work. And we never wanted to get to the shop later than 6:30 in the morning, and get the materials we needed for the day, and double check the work assignment that we had, and then head out into the DMV traffic on the Washington Beltway. And I'd sit in the passenger seat of this big utility truck, and would be asleep usually before we hit the Beltway, fervently praying for a traffic jam so I could sleep longer. And the company we worked for was called Automatic Underground Sprinkler Systems, and then Ernie also had this affiliated company kind of in the same facility called Irrigation Wholesalers, and that plays a role in my story later. And I won't get into the following years and how I got into irrigation and golf sales in this video. That would take way too long, and I'm already going to spend too much time talking about myself before we get to the sprinklers. So you will have seen by now when the sprinkler operation starts. This might be a good time if you're having second thoughts and didn't fast forward back when you saw that to do so, because I'm going to spend some time here. So it was owned by a guy named Ernie Wilson, and he's a very interesting guy. He'd been a helicopter pilot in Vietnam and seen a lot of really wild stuff. He also went to work after that for PepsiCo. From what I understand, and in talking with him back then, he did well with PepsiCo and rose up through the ranks, both in sales and operations. And so he could handle himself working with corporate clients pretty well from that experience. And he was a funny, affable guy, easy to get along with. And so he had good customers. McDonald's Corporation, really we were the ones who kind of reined in the territory that we would cover for them at a time when they were expanding massively in the Mid-Atlantic. But it's fair to say we either installed or performed service on every irrigation system for McDonald's between Fredericksburg, Virginia, and north to Baltimore, and west, to almost to Hagerstown, Maryland. A really big area for a local company to cover, and we had hundreds of McDonald's locations in that area. And in fact, later on, we were called on to help make, and this, just saying it makes me laugh, make the golden arches in water for a fountain for them at the 10,000th McDonald's store in the world, which was at Dale City, Virginia, which is just south of Washington, D.C. And it's just such a ludicrous idea. You can imagine these streams of water that are have amber lights in the pool under them, turning them a bright yellow. Anyhow, some days I'm just 12 years old. But and for those of you who are real, irrigation history aficionados, the light kits, the pumps, nozzles, the whole bit, those were from Rainjet. They had that fountain line of their business, and we just made it much larger, put it in a huge gunite pool. I don't believe that thing's still there today. Somebody probably realized it was ridiculous. But I digress. So we had McDonald's. If you've ever been to Northern Virginia, there is a large section of it directly across the Potomac from Washington called Crystal City. And it was built by a construction company largely named Charles E. Smith Company. We had that contract. We did maintenance on the Smithsonian and buildings around the mall. Those were mostly Rainbirds, as I recall. And we did just, many leading lights in the DC metro area. The Kennedys had a house there. Donald Regan, who worked for Reagan, had a property that we did service on. Linda Carter, Wonder Woman, we did. We handled her property there in Montgomery County, Maryland. And so, I'm a kid from Sioux City, Iowa, and my eyes are just huge every time we go into DC and you go by the White House, which was disappointing the first time I saw it. I expected it to be sort of set apart from the rest of the town in some way, but you look around, there's office buildings across the street, that kind of thing. And the Washington Monument and the Lincoln Memorial, all these things, the Supreme Court. I'm just amazed by what I'm seeing and trying to take it all in while also, working in the hot sun. And gosh, so we'd be at the shop at 6:30 in the morning and we'd work the job site. And I know a lot of you guys still do this today. I shouldn't complain, but we'd work until you couldn't see anymore. And only then would we drive all the way back to the shop, put everything away, and then drive home, hopefully get a shower and something to eat and go to sleep and do it all over again the next day. But it was quite an amazing experience. And the things that we installed, Ernie had Rainbird as a dealer up until I think the very early 80s. And, so he was buying direct. And then the territory changed hands, and the guy who took it over was actually a former partner of Ernie's, and he realized that Rainbird would always be constrained to what Ernie could put in the ground because a lot of people wouldn't buy equipment from a direct competitor. So he pulled the line, and at that point Ernie started purchasing Nelson directly. And so we were putting, tons and tons of 6702s in the ground. We were putting these Nelson spray heads that have the 3 Phillips screws through the top. I believe they were actually made by Safety Lawn. Safety Lawn was an innovator in plastic-bodied sprays back when everybody was doing brass. Really Safety Lawn and Toro were probably the early innovators in that space. And so we were putting these in with 1-inch Nelson plastic valves, and then the Nelson controller of the day. This would have been after they'd really stopped selling the mechanical controllers that were, I think they originally picked them up from Moody, and had gone into completely solid state controllers. So this is the equipment that we're putting in, and Ernie designed decent systems for the most part. Mechanically they were very sound. He was a certified irrigation designer. We did not care too much in the day about matching precipitation rates on rotors, and so that's one of the things that thrilled me when I got one of these guys with the green cap on top, because that's all I ever saw. Technically, if we were doing, a really nicely, hydraulically speaking, or, in terms of the application rate system, we would have used these 6702s for, quarter circles. We would have used the 6703 with a slightly larger nozzle, for half circles, and then we would have used the 6704 wherever we had a full circle. But for, simplicity, every single rotor that went in the ground, regardless of how it was adjusted, was going to be a 6702. So it was good to see that green cap on there. That's what designates it as an 02. And inside these guys are the Beta 2 impact sprinklers that you're familiar with. And the ones that I put in the ground that summer would have been a green case, more that shade of green, maybe even a little lighter than that. The black case came along in 88, as I recall, maybe 87, because this one's black but still has the oval Nelson logo on it. It was 88, I think, when they changed to that logo with just the name Nelson, black on yellow, and then there was something like a growing plant in the O or something like that, or something that was evocative of that anyway. But so this one might be 87, right before the logo changed. But 86, it was kind of the last year of those green cases, and so I saw these things in my sleep for many, many years after that, and they worked okay. Nelson made heavier duty rotors in the same size. They made a rotor that had the brass Alpha 2 in it, and you can argue that those probably would have had longer life, but these were good enough, and they worked well. Very simple to adjust. They had that click set adjustment in there where, it kind of looks like the metal prongs that you're used to moving on an impact sprinkler, but they were plastic and they were on a bit of a ratchet, so that you would snap them right into place. And so they stayed set when you set them. They didn't migrate at all, which was really, really nice. And they had the side inlet that in the very hard ground of Northern Virginia I used more often than not, because it was like slinging a pick into concrete over there on the Piedmont. Just wretched, environment with, terrible sun beating down on you. Thank goodness I was 20 years old. Today it would kill me. And then these guys. So we put a ton of these guys with the Phillips screws through the top. Directly under those Phillips screws is a flat gasket that the screws pass through and then into the plastic body. And they are very pressure sensitive. So we were not using pressure regulating valves. And so if we got into a case where the pressure was running a little higher than these spray heads like to operate at, these darn things leaked. And there was nothing you could do about it. And I can remember, one night we were at a commercial office park in like Germantown, Maryland, say, and it was getting on past dinner time, and the guy who was in charge of facilities for this organization we were working with showed up with his young son to do the final sign off on the system. And he was in no hurry. He'd had his dinner. The kid was happy because he got to have McDonald's and go out with Dad. And my brother and I had been working all darn day, and it's, like I said, getting to be 7:30 in the evening, and we've had enough. But for whatever reason, as we were going around, signing off on each of the spray zones, he would occasionally see, one that was just leaking profusely, and we'd take it apart and we'd tighten it up, and for, you'd get a couple of minutes out of that procedure. And so every time we did that, he'd say, all right, and we'd shut the zone off and he'd sign off, and I'm sure the very next day it leaked again. But for whatever reason, in my delirium, I got into the spirit of finding spray heads that were leaking, and my brother, who had a good heart, I promise you, but also knew self-interest when he saw it, took me aside when the guy wasn't paying attention and says, you need to stop finding goddamn spray heads leaking. And so at that point, I kept my mouth shut, and within 45 minutes or so, we were signed off. We were going to get paid, and we blessedly were on our way home. And so when I see the top of these things, I still get like a visceral reaction to the fact that they are likely going to leak. The nozzles were male threaded nozzles instead of female threaded nozzles, and I just did not think that that was quite as good a design, you know, to work with out in the field. But they made these guys in 3, 4, 6, and I think 12-inch pop-up. I know the following series had a 12-inch pop-up. I'll check my catalogs from the 80s and get back to you on that. And, you know, Safety Lawn had gone with a side inlet on the 6 and 12 years before, so they had that feature at least, which was nice. So one last interesting thing that happened with this style of Nelson spray heads, you know, fast forward to 2023, you know, my brother stayed in irrigation until the sometime in the early 2000s. You know, I left in the 90s and got a degree in computer science and went to work for big companies, and you know, and he was driving a truck for the last part of his working life, and living, I don't know, an hour west of here out in West Virginia, hour and a half west of here, and you know, it's getting towards the end of his life. He had melanoma and passed last February 20th. But you know, the day I really found out how sick he was, I was expecting a box of sprinklers, and I knew some of the contents that were going to be in it, but the guy also said he had some other stuff laying around that he would throw in the box. And sure enough, the day that I found out, I opened this box from this guy, and one of the things that he hadn't told me he had but threw in was this sprinkler. And I had not touched one of these since the summer of 1986. And so, you know, I went out to see my brother the next day, and he'd been kind of in and out of consciousness for a while, not exactly lucid much of the time by then. And I pulled it out of my pocket and handed it to him, and he holds it like this, and he's putting more in his glasses, and he says, that is a Nelson spray head. And we connected back to that summer of 1986, which was such an amazing time. Even though we both agreed that this was a piece of trash. So with that, I'm going to leave you guys to watch these two sprinklers in operation. Thanks so much. So while I'm adjusting this, I thought I'd show you the internal. Those plastic clips are the arc stops, and they have a very positive click to them. I think each click is like 2 degrees, and those were nice and easy, especially easy on your fingers if you're like adjusting, you know, dozens of these things in a day. And then you can see it's got a plastic diffuser screw. It's got kind of a version of a PJ tube there, all plastic. And we've now adjusted this guy. I'm going to adjust it a little more so it doesn't go quite that far that way, and quite that far that way. And we're going to run it again.